On the night of October 14th, 1978, the mountain town of Ashford Hollow went silent. High on the ridge, overlooking the valley, sat the Briarwood Orphanage, a sprawling brick complex built in the 1920s. By morning, every window was dark, every hallway empty, and every record purged. 87 children and 12 staff members had vanished overnight. The official report, issued by the county 2 weeks later, was blunt and unconvincing. Briarwood Orphanage permanently closed due to structural hazards and fire risk. Residents relocated. No photographs of the relocation, no new addresses, no lists of surviving staff, just a single paragraph in the county's annual ledger, as if nearly 100 people had never existed. The building was abandoned and sealed. Locals avoided the Ridge Road for decades, whispering stories about screams in the night, lights in the upper windows, and government trucks that rumbled down the mountain long after the gates were chained shut. 45 years later, in 2023, the name Briarwood surfaced again. Miles Grayson was not a superstitious man. A 35-year-old investigative journalist, he had made his career dissecting corruption scandals and forgotten cold cases. But on a damp November afternoon, buried deep in the archives of the Ashford County Records Office, he found a file that stopped him cold. It wasn't labeled Briarwood. In fact, it was misfiled between two property tax disputes from the early 1980s. The folder was thin, nearly empty, and stamped "Restricted" in faded red ink. Inside was a single carbon copy of a fire inspection report dated October 13th, 1978, one day before the orphanage disappeared. The report should have been routine: electrical hazards, fire exits, extinguishers. But entire sections had been blacked out with heavy marker. At the bottom, a handwritten note stood out in hurried script. Recommend immediate closure. Occupants not to be transferred until clearance from Washington. Do not proceed until confirmation. There was no signature, no inspector's name, no agency stamp, just a scribbled date and those chilling words. Miles leaned back in the creaking wooden chair, staring at the note. His first instinct was that it had to be a mistake, but the more he read, the less it looked like one. Why would a local fire inspection require confirmation from Washington? And if the building was closed the next day, where were the records of relocation? He spent the next hour combing through the shelves, but there were no follow-up documents, no relocation orders, no adoption records. Nothing. It was as if the children had been erased. That evening, in his small apartment above the newspaper office, Miles spread the photocopied report across his desk. Outside, rain tapped against the window, the street lights smudging the glass with pale yellow halos. He jotted notes in his battered leather notebook, drawing arrows between questions. Who authorized closure? Why confirmation from Washington? Where are relocation files? Why is Briarwood missing from county census after 1978? The more he wrote, the more unsettled he became. He checked the state's digital archives. No mention of Briarwood after October 78. Federal census records listed Ashford Hollow's population dropping by nearly 100 between 1978 and 1979, but no explanation given. At midnight, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. He rarely got calls this late, and certainly not from numbers he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he answered. A voice, low and gravelly, spoke without introduction. You've been reading files you shouldn't have. Miles froze, every muscle tightening. Who is this? Silence stretched, only the faint hiss of static in the background. Then, if you want the truth about Briarwood, stop looking in the archives. They're clean. They've been clean for 45 years. You want answers? You go to the Ridge. The building still remembers. The line went dead. Miles sat in the glow of his desk lamp, the rain still pattering against the glass. He replayed the words over and over. The Ridge, the building still remembers. He wanted to dismiss it as a prank, but deep down he knew better. Someone knew he had touched the file. Someone had been waiting. He looked again at the faded carbon copy, the blacked-out paragraphs, the handwritten note. For the first time that night, Miles felt something colder than curiosity crawling into his chest. He wasn't chasing a story anymore. He was standing at the edge of something vast, something carefully buried. And for reasons he couldn't yet name, he knew the moment he drove up that ridge road, there would be no turning back. The next morning, the town of Ashford Hollow looked deceptively ordinary. Children waited for buses along cracked sidewalks. The diner clattered with plates and the smell of frying bacon. And old men gathered in front of the hardware store to debate football scores. For most of its residents, Briarwood Orphanage was just a relic, a decaying shape on the ridge that no one mentioned anymore. For Miles, it had become the only thing that mattered. He spent the morning combing through the county newspaper archives. On microfilm reels from October 1978, he expected headlines: tragic fire at orphanage or children relocated to state facilities. Instead, there was nothing. No obituary columns for staff, no coverage of adoption placements. It was as if the orphanage had never closed at all. By noon, he printed out every article from the fall of 1978, laid them in a timeline, and circled the gaps. One week in particular stood out: October 14th through October 21st. The local paper, which normally published twice a week without fail, had not issued a single edition during those 7 days. When publication resumed, the first headline read simply, "County Fair draws record crowds." Miles stared at the paper, shaking his head. A missing week, a missing building, nearly 100 missing lives. That evening, unable to shake the phone call, he drove his aging sedan up the ridge road. The forest pressed close on either side, bare branches rattling against the windshield in the wind. The further he climbed, the more the town fell away, replaced by silence in the steady hum of the engine. The gates of Briarwood came into view around a bend. They were tall, wrought iron, streaked with rust, chained and padlocked. A faded sign still hung crookedly across them: property of the state, no trespassing. Beyond the gates, the orphanage loomed. Time had not been kind. The roof sagged, windows gaped like empty eyes, ivy crawled up the walls. And yet, despite the decay, the structure carried an undeniable presence. Miles felt the weight of its silence pressing against him. He parked by the roadside and stepped out into the cold air. The forest smelled of wet leaves and iron. His footsteps crunched on gravel as he approached the gate. He pressed his hands against the bars, peering into the overgrown courtyard. The place looked dead, but then he noticed something that made his pulse quicken. The padlock was new. The iron was shiny, unweathered, completely unlike the rusted gate. Someone had been here recently. Someone wanted the building closed not just in 1978, but now. He lifted his camera, snapped photos of the gate, the lock, the courtyard. As the shutter clicked, he thought he heard something, a faint metallic rattle, like a door closing somewhere deep inside the building. He froze, straining to listen, but the wind swallowed the sound. By the time he drove back down into town, night had already fallen. His apartment felt smaller than usual, its walls closing in as he reviewed the photos. The padlock glinted on his laptop screen, undeniable proof that Briarwood was not as forgotten as the town believed. He was still staring when his phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. He considered ignoring it, but his curiosity outweighed his fear. "Grayson," he answered, voice steady. The same gravelly tone replied, "You went to the ridge." Miles' jaw tightened. "Who are you? You don't need my name, you need the truth. And the truth is this: those children were not relocated, they were taken." The words sank into the silence between them. Miles' throat went dry. Taken by who? "You'll see for yourself soon enough, but first you need to understand. Briarwood wasn't just an orphanage, it was a front. The building still to you stands because it was built to hide something far older than 1978. Miles gripped the phone tighter. "Why call me? Why not the police? Why me?" A pause, heavy, deliberate. "Because you're the only one stupid enough or brave enough to still be asking questions. And because it's in your blood." The line went dead again. Miles sat frozen, heart pounding. "In your blood." The words echoed, sharper each time. He thought of his own childhood, his mother, who never spoke of her early years, his father, gone before Miles had turned 10. No one in his family had ever mentioned Briarwood. And yet, as he looked at the photographs spread across his desk, a chill certainty settled over him. Whoever had called knew something about him that even he didn't know. And if that was true, then his connection to Briarwood wasn't just professional, it was personal. Sleep did not come easily. Miles lay in bed staring at the cracked plaster of his ceiling, replaying the call word for word. In your blood. The phrase gnawed at him, dragging up half-forgotten fragments of his childhood. His mother's evasive answers about where she grew up, the old photographs she had burned in the fireplace when he was 12, and her deathbed confession, spoken in delirium. Don't go looking for where we came from. At dawn, Miles gave up on sleep. He brewed a pot of coffee, pulled on his coat, and walked to the newspaper office. The building, once a bustling hub of reporters and presses, now housed only a handful of staff. His editor, a wary man named Delaney, was already at his desk, tapping the ash from a cigarette into an overfull tray. You look like hell, Delaney muttered. Been digging, Miles said. He placed the photocopied fire report on the desk. Ever heard of Briarwood Orphanage? Delaney glanced at the paper, then back at him with a frown. Briarwood? That place up on the ridge? Place closed down decades ago. Why? Miles hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Because 87 children and a dozen staff vanished, and no one wrote about it. No coverage, no obituaries, no records of relocation. Just silence. Delaney exhaled a stream of smoke. And you think there's a story in it? I think there's more than a story, Miles said. I think there's a cover-up. The editor studied him for a long moment. Careful, Grayson. Some rocks aren't meant to be turned over, especially around here. It wasn't a dismissal, but it wasn't encouragement either. Delaney had worked in Ashford Hollow long enough to know which ghosts weren't to be disturbed. Miles returned to his desk, but the warning only sharpened his resolve. He spent the afternoon digging through census archives, cross-checking adoption records, foster placements, and death certificates. Patterns emerged, gaps where files should have been, names struck through with thick ink, pages missing altogether. By evening, his eyes burned from the microfilm reader. One name caught his attention, Evelyn Hargrove, listed in a 1977 census as a staff nurse at Briarwood. By 1979, her name disappeared. No death certificate, no employment transfers, nothing. On instinct, Miles searched the county directory. To his surprise, an Evelyn Hargrove still lived in the next town over, in a nursing home. He didn't wait. He grabbed his notebook, drove the 40 miles through winding roads, and arrived just as dusk painted the sky in violet and gray. The nursing home smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted flowers. At the front desk, he asked for Evelyn. The attendant's brows rose. She doesn't get many visitors, the young woman said softly. Room 212. Miles climbed the narrow staircase. The hallway was dim, carpet worn. He found the door, knocked gently, and entered. Evelyn Hargrove sat by the window in a wheelchair, a frail figure with sharp eyes that still held fire despite her years. When Miles introduced himself, her gaze lingered on him in silence, as if measuring something unseen. You're looking into Briarwood, she said at last. The words chilled him. Yes. How did you... You have your mother's eyes, Evelyn interrupted. Miles's breath caught. You knew her? Evelyn's hands trembled as they gripped the armrests. Knew her? Child, she was one of mine. She lived in Briarwood. The world tilted beneath him. His mother, who had refused to speak of her childhood, who had burned every photograph, had been part of the orphanage. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. They told us it was a home, a sanctuary. But after the inspectors came in 78, things changed. Men from Washington arrived with papers we were not allowed to read. They said some of the children were special, that the state had new plans for them. I begged to know where they were taking them. I was told never to ask again. Her eyes glistened with tears. The next morning, the halls were empty. I was sent home. When I returned 2 days later, Briarwood was locked. I never saw a single child again. Miles's heart pounded. What kind of plans? What did they mean by special? But Evelyn only shook her head, her frail body trembling. Don't dig any deeper. It will consume you like it consumed your mother. Her words hung in the dim room, thick with the weight of things unspoken. Miles wanted to press her, to demand answers, but the haunted look in her eyes told him she had already said more than she should. As he rose to leave, she caught his wrist with surprising strength. If you value your life and the lives of those you love, you will leave Briarwood buried. Outside, night had fallen. The air was sharp, the stars faint through drifting clouds. Miles stood in the parking lot, Evelyn's warning echoing in his head, but the truth burned hotter than fear. His mother had been part of Briarwood. Whatever happened, there was not just history, it was his inheritance. He started the car, headlights slicing through the darkness. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just chasing a story anymore. He was chasing himself. Miles drove back toward Ashford Hollow in silence, the highway stretching endlessly through the dark hills. Evelyn's words pressed into him like iron. She was one of mine. His mother, who had built her life on silence, who had left only fragments of warnings behind, had grown up inside Briarwood Orphanage. The road blurred beneath his headlights. He thought of the burned photographs, the quiet terror in her eyes when he once asked about her childhood, the way she avoided certain questions with a forced smile. Now it all made sense. She hadn't been hiding poverty or shame. She had been hiding Briarwood. By the time he reached town, it was past midnight. He parked in front of the newspaper office but couldn't bring himself to go upstairs to his apartment. Instead, he sat in the driver's seat, flipping through his notebook. Questions filled the pages, each arrow pointing to the same conclusion. His mother had been among the children who disappeared. And if Evelyn was right, those children weren't simply relocated. They had been taken. But taken for what? The next morning, Miles forced himself into routine. Coffee, a shower, scanning his email. But his thoughts never left the ridge. Delaney raised an eyebrow when he came into the office, but said nothing. Miles buried himself in records, tracing every government contract in Ashford County for 1978. He found one lead, a payment to a construction firm for reinforcement of county facility, site unspecified. The date, November 1978, just weeks after Briarwood closed. The contractor's name was Harker & Sons, still active, still local. Miles drove out to the company yard, a cluster of corrugated metal buildings at the edge of town. A man in his 60s, barrel-chested with silver hair and grease-stained hands, met him by the chain-link gate. The name on his coveralls read Harker. "I'm looking into old county contracts," Miles said carefully, "particularly one from November 1978. Harker's eyes narrowed. "What about it?" "It mentions reinforcement work. Site not listed. I was hoping you could tell me where." The man wiped his hands on a rag, studied Miles for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're wasting your time, son. That was a long time ago." Miles pressed. "It was Briarwood, wasn't it?" The silence that followed was confirmation enough. Harker looked past him, scanning the road as if to make sure no one else was listening. Then he leaned in close, his voice low. "We didn't reinforce it. We buried it. Concrete poured into basements, tunnels sealed, rooms walled off. We were told it was condemned." "Who told you?" Miles asked. "Not a county. Men in suits, didn't carry local badges, Washington plates on their cars. They watched us every second, made us sign papers we weren't allowed to keep, paid in guashab." Miles's pulse quickened. Why bury an orphanage? Harker's jaw tightened. Because of what was underneath. Before Miles could push further, a horn blared from the yard. Another worker called Harker's name. The man stepped back, the moment broken. "That's all I'll say. You start digging there, you won't like what you find." He turned away, leaving Miles standing in the dust with more questions than answers. That night, as Miles returned to his apartment, his phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. "You spoke to Harker," the voice rasped. Miles swallowed. "And you knew I would." "You're walking the same path your mother walked," the caller said. "She looked too. She came closer than anyone. And that's why she died before she could tell you." A chill ran down Miles's spine. His mother's sudden illness, the way doctors never agreed on a diagnosis, her warning not to look, had it all been more than coincidence? "What was under Briarwood, Baum?" he demanded. The voice paused, the static louder this time, as if the caller were speaking through layers of interference. Not what, who, and some of them may still be alive. The line clicked dead. Miles sat in the darkness of his apartment, the phone heavy in his hand, his pulse hammering in his ears. For the first time, the mystery of Briarwood was no longer confined to dusty archives or fading memories. If survivors existed, then the story wasn't about the dead. It was about the living. And somewhere in the ruins of that orphanage lay the truth his mother had died protecting. The next morning, the ridge loomed larger than ever. Miles sat in his car outside the diner, untouched coffee cooling in the cup holder, eyes fixed on the hazy outline of Briarwood in the distance. The words from the phone call still circled in his head. Not what, who, and some of them may still be alive. For days, the orphanage had been a shadow of the past. Now it was something else, a possible prison, or worse, a tomb with cracks in the walls. He opened his notebook, flipping to the page where he had scrawled his questions. One line stood out now, underlined twice. Where are the children? There was no answer in the county archives, and Evelyn had given him only fragments. If he wanted the truth, he had no choice. He had to step inside Briarwood. That evening, under a slate-gray sky, Miles returned to the Ridge Road. The gate loomed before him, padlock gleaming. He parked the car farther down the shoulder this time, out of sight from the bend, and pulled a crowbar from the trunk. The metal clanged against the padlock twice before it snapped. The chain slithered to the ground with a hollow rattle. He pushed the gate open just enough to slip through. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds as tall as his waist. The wind whistled through the broken windows, carrying a sound almost like children's voices. He told himself it was only the wind. Inside, the orphanage smelled of dust and mildew. The entry hall stretched into darkness, its once grand staircase sagging under years of rot. Miles flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting across peeling wallpaper and shattered glass. He moved cautiously, notebook in one hand, light in the other. Classrooms yawned open on either side, desks overturned, chalkboards smeared with ghostly outlines of lessons never finished. In one room, a row of small shoes still lined the wall, untouched by time. The deeper he went, the stronger the feeling that the building wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. The dust was disturbed in places, footprints barely visible in the beam of his light. Some large, some small. Too small. His chest tightened. He pressed deeper into the west wing, where Evelyn had said the children slept. Rusted bed frames lined the walls, mattresses stripped bare. On one wall, etched into the plaster, were faint markings, tallies scratched with something sharp, as if someone had been counting days. The line stopped abruptly at 94. Miles snapped a photo, his hands trembling. 94 days, nearly 3 months of waiting. Waiting for what? As he turned to leave, a hollow thud echoed from deeper inside the building. He froze, breath caught in his throat. The sound came again, metal striking metal, faint but deliberate. He followed, each step stirring dust into the beam of his flashlight. The corridor narrowed, leading to a set of double doors chained shut. Beyond them, the sound repeated, a rhythm, a signal. He pressed his ear against the door. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. The hair on the back of his neck rose. He wasn't alone. Hello? His voice cracked in the silence. Is someone there? The knocking stopped. He fumbled with the chain, but it was secured by a lock far heavier than the one at the gate. He raised the crowbar, struck once, twice, but the sound only rang through the empty hall. Whatever was on the other side had gone silent. Defeated, he lowered the bar, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He backed away slowly, flashlight fixed on the doors. For the first time, he followed eyes watching him from the dark. When he finally stepped back into the night air, he realized how close he had come to panic. The gate clanged shut behind him, the broken padlock discarded at his feet. He climbed into his car, hands gripping the steering wheel, lungs aching for breath. Halfway down the Ridge Road, his phone buzzed. The same number. He answered without thinking. You went inside, the voice rasped. Miles forced his words through clenched teeth. There's someone still there. Yes, the caller said, but not in the way you think. What do you mean? They were kept. Some were changed. The ones who knock are not asking for rescue, Grayson. They are warning you to leave. Miles's knuckles whitened around the phone. Who are you? Why do you keep calling me? The voice hesitated, the static heavier than before. Because I was one of them. I survived Briarwood. The line cut dead. Senmamatan. Miles stared into the night, the ridge receding in his rearview mirror, his reflection pale in the glass. The truth was no longer a question of missing files or old rumors. It had a voice, and it was calling directly to him. The night after the call stretched endlessly. Miles replayed the words again and again. I was one of them. I survived Briarwood. It was no longer speculation, no longer half-buried whispers in archives or warnings from frightened old witnesses. Someone who had lived through the disappearance was alive, had a phone, and had chosen him. But why? By morning he had resolved to find out. He traced the number through his newsroom's call logs, but the trail led nowhere. It had been masked, bouncing through a web of dead carriers. Whoever this survivor was, they knew how to hide. So he turned back to the past. If Evelyn had known his mother, then others might still be alive who had brushed against Briarwood before it closed. He combed through every county record, every employee list, until one name surfaced: Charles Yates, listed as a maintenance worker in 1907, reported missing in early 1979. There was no death certificate, no relocation, just missing. But Miles found an address, a small farmhouse outside Ashford Hollow, still listed in his name. That afternoon, he drove out through rain-slick country roads, fields stretching brown and bare to the horizon. The farmhouse sagged under the weight of decades, its paint flaking, windows boarded. Weeds swallowed the yard. It looked abandoned. He knocked once, twice. No answer. But as he turned to leave, he noticed the faintest glow seeping from behind one of the boarded windows. Candlelight. He circled to the back, found a side door, and pushed it open. The hinges groaned. Inside, the air smelled of dust, kerosene, and something metallic. A single candle burned on a table cluttered with newspapers, journals, and maps of the ridge. In the corner, a man hunched in a chair, wrapped in a wool blanket. His eyes lifted as Miles entered, sharp, wary, but not entirely surprised. "You shouldn't have come," the man rasped. His voice carried the scrape of age, but underneath it, something familiar. Echoes of the same tone Miles had heard on the phone. "You called me," Miles said softly. The man nodded once. "Because you wouldn't stop. I needed you to understand what you were chasing. But now that you've seen the ridge, now that you've heard them knocking." He trailed off, eyes distant. Miles stepped closer. "You said you were one of them, a survivor." The man's jaw tightened. He reached for a battered journal on the table, pushed it across the wood. Names, faces, the ones who were taken, the ones who didn't come back. Miles opened it, pages filled with sketches, children's faces rendered in rough charcoal, names scribbled beneath. Some were crossed out, others left blank. His throat constricted as he flipped through. "My mother," Miles whispered. "She was there." The man's gaze sharpened. "Yes, Anna Grayson. She was older than most. She fought harder than any of us, and she paid the price." Miles's pulse hammered in his ears. "What happened that night? Where did they take you?" The man leaned back, the candlelight flickering across the hollows of his face. "We weren't taken away. We were taken down, beneath the orphanage. They had built something under the floors, deeper than the tunnels the miners left decades before. We were led down there in groups. Some of us never came back. Experiments, they called them. Conditioning. Adaptation. Words children couldn't understand." His voice shook, but his eyes never left Miles's. "They told us we were special, that we were chosen, but we were cattle, Grayson, tested subjects." Miles's stomach turned. He thought of the locked double doors, the rhythmic knocking. "And the one still inside?" The man looked away, eye glinting in the candlelight. "Not all of us survived the same way. Some became something else. When you heard the knocking, that wasn't a call for help. That was a warning. They remember what was done to them, and they don't want to be found." Miles closed the journal, his hand trembling on the cover. "Why tell me all this? Why now?" The man's expression hardened. "Because you're already in it. The moment you opened that file, they marked you. You think you're chasing Briarwood, but Briarwood is already chasing you." A gust rattled the loose boards on the windows, snuffing the candle. The room plunged into darkness. And in that silence, from somewhere deep beneath the farmhouse floor, Miles heard it. 3 hollow knocks. The candle had gone out, but the sound lingered. 3 hollow knocks, deliberate, echoing faintly through the floorboards of the farmhouse. Miles froze, every nerve in his body straining toward the dark. Charles Yates didn't move. His eyes closed as if he had been waiting for this moment. "They followed me here," Yates whispered. They always do. Miles swallowed, his throat dry. Who? Survivors? Yates shook his head slowly, shadows cutting his features into something hard and haunted. Not survivors. Remnants. The word hung heavy in the dark. Miles forced his flashlight on, its beam jerking across stacks of yellowed paper and warped wood. The sound had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse. Sit down, Yates said, his voice edged with steel. If you're going to hear it, you'll hear all of it. Miles lowered himself into a chair opposite him. The journal still lay between them, its pages filled with faces that refused to fade. Yates leaned forward, hands clasped as if in prayer. They took us down beneath Briarwood, Yates began, through a stairwell hidden behind the chapel. They said it was safer underground, away from fire hazards. We were children. We believed them. But the deeper we went, the less it felt like a home, and the more it felt like a terrible. His gaze flickered to the boarded window. There were rooms lined with steel, humming with machines we didn't understand. They hooked some of us to wires, made us listen to sounds that weren't sounds, tones that shook inside your skull. Others were given injections. They said it was medicine. It wasn't. Some children changed. Their eyes stopped focusing. Their voices stopped making sense. They began repeating as if something else was speaking through them. Miles's stomach nodded. Repeating what? Yates hesitated, then spoke in a whisper that seemed too heavy for the room. 3 knocks, 3 warnings, 3 days. That's what they said over and over until they were gone. The memory pulled a chill through the air. Miles thought of the locked doors in Briarwood, the rhythmic pounding, the same pattern. Why didn't you tell anyone? Miles asked. I tried, Yates rasped. Back in '79, I told the sheriff. Next morning, he turned up dead in his cruiser. They said heart attack. He was 36. I knew better. Miles leaned forward. So you ran. Yates nodded. I ran and I hid. But the knocking, it never stopped. Wherever I go, sooner or later, it finds me. Sometimes in the walls, sometimes in my sleep. They're not all dead, Grayson. Some were left behind, and they want the rest of us silent. The boards over the window rattled suddenly, shaken by a gust of wind or something heavier. Both men turned toward the sound, breath held, then silence again. Miles's voice was low, steady despite the chill in his chest. You called me because you think I can finish what you couldn't. Yates's eyes met his, pale with desperation. You're not just some reporter digging where you shouldn't. You're blood. Your mother was one of us, and that makes you part of it. Whether you like it or not, Briarwood is in you. The floor creaked. Another knock, softer this time, closer. Miles rose, flashlight beam cutting toward the floorboards. Then we stop hiding, he said. Show me where it happened. Show me how to get underground. Yates shook his head violently. No. If you open that place again, it won't just be you they take. They'll take everyone you've ever touched. But Miles's resolve had hardened. His mother's warnings, Evelyn's haunted eyes, the unanswered names in the journal. He couldn't walk away. He needed to see what lay beneath Briarwood with his own eyes. A car passed on the distant road, its headlights flickering briefly through a gap in the boards. Yates stiffened. They're watching, he hissed. Miles peered through the crack. A dark sedan crawled down the country lane, windows tinted, no plates on the front bumper. It slowed as it passed the farmhouse, then continued into the night. Yates's voice trembled. They never stopped watching. 45 years, and they're still guarding the ruins. If you go up that ridge again, you won't come back. Miles closed the journal and slipped it under his arm. Then I'll make sure the world knows before they can bury me. He turned toward the door, the weight of the night pressing down on him. Behind him, Yates spoke once more, his voice raw. If you go under that place, Grayson, remember this. The knocking isn't asking you to enter. It's begging you to stay away. Miles stepped into the cold night air, the journal pressed against his chest. The ridge loomed against the stars, silent, waiting. For the first time, he understood that the truth he was chasing might not set him free. It might be the very thing that consumed him. The journal weighed heavy in Miles's hands as he drove back toward town. Its pages whispered every time the car hit a bump, as though the faces sketched in charcoal were alive, restless. He wanted to pull over and study each line, each name, but exhaustion kept him focused on the road. The farmhouse and Yates's haunted eyes were already dissolving into memory, but the knocking still pulsed faintly in his skull. 3 beats, 3 warnings. By the time he reached his apartment, dawn was bruising the horizon. He poured coffee, sat at his desk, and opened the journal again. The children's names were there. Michael, Sarah, James, Lydia. Some names had birth years beside them. Some had nothing. His eyes landed on a page near the back. Anna Grayson. His mother's face, drawn in shaky charcoal, the eyes hard, defiant. A single note beside it. Resisted. Taken below. Never returned. Miles's chest tightened. This was no longer an investigation. It was family. He called Delaney at the paper, voice hoarse. I need access to the morgue photos from 1978. Everything, unclaimed bodies, autopsy reports, state files. Delaney swore on the other end. Grayson, you're chasing ghosts. Then let me prove they existed. Miles hung up before Delaney could argue. Hours later, hunched in the archive room's dim light, Miles spread out photographs yellowed with age. He flipped through autopsies, farm accidents, car wrecks, bar fights, but found nothing from Briarwood. Not a single child, not a single staff member. What he did find was stranger, a set of sealed evidence envelopes stamped property of state, do not distribute. Inside, grainy black and white images showed fragments of tunnels, corrugated metal walls, heavy machinery, pipes labeled with chemical warnings. None of them matched anything on the orphanage's surface floor plans. Yates had been telling the truth. There was something beneath Briarwood. That night, restless, Miles returned to the ridge. The gates hung open from where he had broken the chain. The orphanage loomed, dark against the sky, its windows like hollow sockets watching him approach. He slipped inside with a backpack, flashlight, notebook, recorder, crowbar, camera. Dust swirled in the beam of his light as he moved toward the chapel, retracing Yates's description. The pews lay collapsed in heaps, the altar split, but behind it a panel of rotting wood stood oddly intact. He pried at the edges. The crowbar screeched, wood splintered, and behind it, a narrow staircase yawned downward into black. The air that drifted up was colder, metallic. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, heart hammering, and began to descend. The steps ended at a steel door bolted from the outside. Rust streaked its surface, but when he pressed, it shifted slightly, as though something behind it was still breathing. He forced the bolts free with the crowbar, metal groaning in protest. The door creaked open onto a tunnel that smelled of earth and machinery. The walls were reinforced with concrete, lined with corroded pipes. Old light fixtures dangled overhead, dead for decades. He raised his camera, snapping photos. The flash illuminated strange markings along the walls. Faded symbols, repeating triangles and circles, patterns carved by hand or by something sharper. The tunnel stretched into darkness. His footsteps echoed, each one magnified until it sounded like a dozen people walking beside him. He reached an intersection, 3 corridors branching off. On the wall, someone had scrawled in thick black paint, 94 days. His stomach turned. He remembered the tallies carved into the dormitory wall. 94 days, the same number. The same countdown. He took the left corridor door. The air grew damp, the smell of rust mixing with something sour. Ahead, the passage opened into a chamber lined with cages, dozens of them stacked like crates. Inside, only shreds of fabric and bones remained. Some were child-sized. Miles staggered back, bile rising in his throat. His flashlight trembled in his hand. He snapped photos, the shutters click, the only sound in the suffocating silence. Then, 3 knocks. Not from above, from inside one of the cages. He swung the light toward the sound. At the far end, in a cage half collapsed with rust, something shifted. A pale hand gripped the bars, thin as bone. The skin gray and stretched. Fingers tapped once, twice, 3 times. Miles's breath caught. His instincts screamed to run, but his feet held him rooted. Slowly the hand withdrew, vanishing into the shadows of the cage. The silence that followed was absolute. He raised his camera, the flash burst, and in that split second of light, he saw eyes staring back at him from the dark. Dozens of them, small, unblinking. The flash died and the chamber returned to black. Miles turned and ran, the tunnel swallowing his footsteps, the sound of knocking chasing him into the night. Miles didn't remember half the climb back up the staircase. His legs carried him on instinct, his lungs clawing for air, until he stumbled through the broken chapel door and collapsed against a pew. The orphanage above was silent, the night pressing in through shattered windows. But down below in the black chambers, the echo of knocking still rattled in his bones. He forced himself to breathe, dragging trembling hands over his face. Then he pulled the camera from his pack and scrolled through the images. Each flashlit frame sent a jolt through him. Cages, bones, the tally marks, the pale hand. And in the last photo, half caught in the white burst, dozens of eyes reflecting the light. Not tricks of shadow, not dust motes or camera blur. Eyes, watching him. His thumb hovered over the delete button, but he stopped. Proof mattered. Proof was all that separated him from madness. Back in his apartment hours later, dawn bleeding pale across the window, Miles spread the photographs on the desk. He taped them in sequence across the wall, building a map of horror. At the center, he pinned the page of the journal with his mother's name. Around it, he layered the cages, the marks, the hand. It didn't look like evidence. It looked like a warning. A knock jolted him upright. Not three, but one. Someone at the door. He grabbed the crowbar from beside the desk and inched forward. Through the peephole stood Delaney, his editor, holding a paper cup of coffee. Miles sagged with relief, opened the door. "You look like hell," Delaney muttered, stepping inside. His eyes caught on the photographs plastered to the wall, his jaw tightening. "Jesus, Grayson, what the hell is this?" "The truth," Miles said hoarsely. "They built something under Briarwood. They experimented on children. And some of them are still down there." Delaney's gaze lingered on the photo of the pale hand gripping the cage. He set the coffee down slowly. "You're telling me after 45 years there are people alive down there?" "I don't know if alive is the word," Miles said. "But they're there. I saw them." Delaney turned away, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know what happens if we print this as this without corroboration? They'll laugh us out of the newsroom. Best case. Worst case, they'll shut us down. You're playing with fire, son." Miles slammed a fist against the desk. "Then let's burn. My mother was in there, Delaney. She was taken. If we stay silent, we're complicit." The older man studied him, weariness etched into his features. Finally, he sighed. "Get me more. Documents, records, something they can't bury with ridicule. Then maybe we run it." He left, the door clicking shut behind him. Miles turned back to the wall of photographs, heart pounding. Get me more. That evening, unable to resist, he returned to the farmhouse. Yates was waiting, lantern burning on the table. His eyes flicked immediately to the journal tucked under Miles's arm. "You went down," Yates said flatly. Miles nodded. "I saw them." Yates's face hardened. "Then it's too late. Once you see them, they don't let go. They're in your head now, that knocking. You'll hear it everywhere. And if you listen too long, you'll start answering back." Miles shivered. "What are they? Survivors? Experiments?" "They were children once," Yates said softly, "but what they became isn't something you or I have words for. The doctors tried to reshape them, said they were unlocking potential. All they did was carve the humanity out and leave something hollow." He leaned closer, voice low. "And those of us who escaped, we carry the scars, nightmares, voices in the dark. Your mother fought harder than anyone, but even she couldn't outrun it." Miles's throat tightened. "She warned me. She burned every photo, every trace." "Because she knew the truth," Yates said. "Once you're marked by Briarwood, there's no erasing it." A knock rattled the farmhouse door, 3 deliberate beats. Both men froze. Yates doused the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. "They found you," he whispered. Miles's pulse thundered. The children? Yates's reply was almost inaudible. Not children anymore. The knocking came again, louder this time, shaking the boards. Miles clutched the crowbar, breath ragged. Yates gripped his arm hard enough to bruise. Whatever happens, the old man hissed, don't open that door. The knocking grew sharper, each strike rattling the farmhouse walls. 3 measured beats. A pause. 3 more. Miles's breath came shallow, his knuckles white on the crowbar. Yates crouched low, eyes fixed on the door as though sheer will could hold it shut. Stay quiet, Yates hissed. Don't even breathe too loud. Miles strained his ears. Outside, gravel crunched beneath slow, deliberate steps circling the house. Something or someone was testing the walls, brushing along the siding, probing for weakness. A faint scraping followed, nails or claws dragging over wood. The sound moved to the boarded window. Slats groaned. A pale shape pressed against the cracks. Small fingers, impossibly thin, tapping the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Then 3 hollow knocks again. Miles's chest tightened. His camera hung heavy at his side, but he didn't dare raise it. The thought of a flash betraying their position turned his blood cold. Yates's whisper was ragged. They don't knock for permission. They knock to remind us. They know where we are. The scraping ceased. For a moment, silence reigned, so heavy Miles thought his heartbeat might give them away. Then slowly the steps receded. Gravel shifted. The night swallowed the sound. Neither man moved for long minutes. Finally, Yates lit the lantern again, the dim glow barely steady in his trembling hands. His face looked carved from stone. You see now why I never left this place. They don't forgive. They don't forget. Miles swallowed hard. Then we can't hide. We have to expose it. Let the world see. Yates's laugh was bitter, hollow. The world doesn't want to see. I tried, 40 years ago. The files vanished. Witnesses disappeared. Some turned up in rivers. Some never turned up at all. Miles leaned forward, voice hard. I have proof. Photos, journals, records. I can make people listen. Yates's eyes narrowed. And if you make them listen, you'll be silenced before the ink dries. Do you think Washington spent all that money just to let the truth walk free? Miles didn't answer. His mind flashed to the black sedan creeping past the farmhouse, to the phone calls, to Delaney's warning. Yates was right. Something larger than the children's fate had been at play. Still, he felt the fire in his chest. If they're still down there, we owe it to them. To the ones who never came back. To my mother. At her name, Yates's face softened with something like grief. Anna wanted the same. She nearly exposed them once. She smuggled out pages, maps, lists, but they caught her before she could finish. She told me the last night I saw her, if I can't tell the story, maybe my son will. The words hit Miles like a blade. His mother had known, even then, that this burden might pass to him. Yates pushed a brittle folder across the table. Inside were faded diagrams of Briarwood, annotated in hurried script. One showed the chapel stairwell. Another showed chambers deeper still, labeled only with single letters, A, B, C, D. At the bottom of one sheet, in a shaking hand, Level E, do not enter. What's on Level E? Miles asked. Yates looked away. The ones who never stopped knocking. Before Miles could respond, headlights swept across the farmhouse windows. Both men froze. Outside, a vehicle slowed to a stop, engine idling low. Not the old sedan this time. A black SUV, newer, government plates glinting in the beam of the lantern. Yates killed the light. They know you're here. The SUV doors opened. Boots crunched on gravel. Voices murmured, too low to make out. Then a heavy fist pounded the front door. 3 times. Not hollow, not supernatural. Human. Federal agents, a voice barked. Open the door. Miles's pulse thundered. He looked at Yates, who shook his head violently. If you open that door, they'll take the journal, the photos, everything, and you'll disappear with it. The pounding came again, harder this time. The walls shook. Open the door! Miles's grip tightened on the crowbar. His choices narrowed to 2. Step into the light and hand over everything, or vanish into the dark tunnels below Briarwood and face what still waited there. Yates whispered fiercely, "The ridge is death, but at least down there, you'll find answers. Up here, you'll find a bullet in an unmarked grave." The pounding rattled the farmhouse one final time, then silence. Outside, boots shifted, voices muttered. The SUV's headlights flared brighter, sweeping across the walls. They weren't leaving. Miles shoved the journal into his pack, heart hammering. He didn't know if he had the courage to face what waited beneath Briarwood, but he knew he couldn't let the truth die here, in this rotting farmhouse under the eyes of men who had been burying it for half a century. He turned to Yates. "Then we go back underground." The farmhouse walls vibrated faintly with the idling engine outside. Shadows slid across the boarded windows as men with flashlights circled the house. Yates's voice was a rasp in the dark. "We don't have time. They'll come in soon. If they catch you with the journal, you're done." Miles's chest tightened, but he nodded. "Then we move now." Yates pulled a rusted trapdoor open in the corner of the room. Beneath it, a narrow crawl space dropped into black. "Old storm cellar. It runs under the fields and links to the drainage tunnels. If we move fast, we can get back to Briarwood without them tailing us." The pounding came again at the front door, 3 booming fists that shook the hinges. Miles shoved his pack over his shoulders and climbed down into the crawl space. Yates followed, pulling the trap shut above them. The farmhouse muffled, the sounds of agents above turning into muted thuds. The tunnel was damp, reeking of earth and mold. Water dripped from the low ceiling. They crawled for what felt like hours, scraping knees and palms on stone, until the passage widened enough to stand. Faint moonlight bled through grates above, marking their path like breadcrumbs. Finally, Yates led them to a rusted iron ladder. "This comes out by the Old Mill Road. From there, it's a straight shot to the ridge." They emerged behind a thicket of trees. In the distance, headlights still glowed at the farmhouse, agents' voices faint in the night. Miles exhaled, lungs aching. They had slipped the net, for now. The drive back to Briarwood was silent, the journal clutched in Miles's lap. Yates kept his eyes on the road, jaw set. At last the orphanage appeared, its dark bulk rising against the stars. Miles parked well off the road, hidden in the trees. They approached on foot, the gates yawning open where Miles had broken them days before. The courtyard was unchanged, weeds whispering in the cold wind. Inside, the chapel was just as Miles had left it. Splintered wood, broken pews, the hidden stair yawning below. The metallic chill of the underground drifted up to meet them. Yates paused at the top step. His face was pale, eyes fixed on the dark. "I swore I'd never come back down here." Miles gripped the crowbar tighter. "If we want answers, this is the only way." They descended slowly, footsteps echoing against concrete walls. The air grew colder, the silence pressing tighter with each step. When they reached the first chamber, Miles's beams swept over the cages again, catching bones that seemed to shift in the light. Yates's breath hitched. They left it all here. Miles pressed deeper. They passed the intersection, the painted scrawl of 94 days looming like a scar. He chose the corridor marked C on the diagram, the one Yates had avoided naming. The passage narrowed, the walls slick with condensation. At the end, they reached another chamber. This one different. No cages. Instead, rows of metal chairs bolted to the floor, each with restraints at the wrists and ankles. Rusted machines loomed beside them, tangled with cables and cracked screens. On the wall, words were etched deep into the concrete. "Listen close. Do not answer." Miles's throat tightened. "What does it mean?" Yates's voice was barely a whisper. "They use sound, pulses, frequencies you couldn't hear with your ears but felt in your bones. It broke some of us. It changed others. The ones who knocked." He trailed off, shaking his head. Before Miles could respond, a faint hum drifted through the chamber. At first, it seemed like machinery stirring back to life, but the power had been dead for decades. Then the sound sharpened, low, thrumming, vibrating in his teeth. Miles clutched his head. The hum grew stronger, pulsing in waves. Yates staggered back, pressing his palms to his ears. "It's starting again," he gasped. The hum swelled, then fractured into a voice, thin, mechanical, layered over itself 100 times. It spoke in rhythm, 3 tones, pause, 3 tones. Miles's stomach dropped. The same cadence as the knocking. He raised the flashlight toward the far wall and froze. A figure stood at the edge of the beam, small, thin, head tilted unnaturally to one side. Its eyes reflected white in the light. Behind it, more figures stirred in the shadows, their outlines childlike but wrong, movements jerky, broken. Yates's voice cracked. They were left here, waiting. The figures stepped forward, their hands rising to the walls. Knuckles struck concrete in perfect unison. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. The sound filled the chamber, echoing through the tunnels, rattling Miles's bones. He stumbled back toward the corridor, the beam shaking. Yates grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the stair. We have to leave. Now. But as they turned, the hum rose again, words threading through the noise, layered voices speaking as one. Come closer. The corridor vibrated with the sound. 3 knocks, pause 3 knocks, layered beneath the inhuman hum. Miles staggered backward, the crowbar slick in his palm, his flashlight beam darting across the chamber. The figures pressed closer. At first glance, they looked like children. Their frames small, their faces soft. But their movements betrayed them. Joints bending too far, heads twitching in sharp, unnatural angles. Their eyes caught the light like mirrors, reflecting white and empty. Don't look at them, Yates hissed, dragging Miles toward the stair. Whatever you do, don't answer. But the voices swelled, filling every corner of the chamber. A chorus, hundreds layered as one. Come closer, come closer, come closer. The words weren't just in the air. They thrummed inside Miles's skull, vibrating through his teeth down into his chest. His knees buckled. He clutched the crowbar tighter, trying to focus on the cold iron in his hand, something real against the tide of sound. One figure broke from the group. It shuffled forward, bare feet dragging across the concrete. Up close, the illusion of childhood is shattered. Skin stretched too tight over bones, mouth twitching with spasms, lips parting and closing in sync with the chorus. Yates yanked Miles back into the corridor. Don't let them touch you! The figure's hand reached out, fingers long and gray, nails cracked. It struck the wall again. 3 sharp knocks that rattled through the concrete. Miles's flashlight flickered. The beam sputtered, then died, plunging them into darkness. The knocks filled the void. 3. Pause. 3. Panic surged. He fumbled in his pack for the camera. The flash burst, blinding for a split second. In that searing light, he saw them all. Dozens, maybe more, pressed against the chamber walls. Faces gaunt, mouths open, eyes glowing white. The moment the flash died, the darkness swallowed them again. Yates's voice trembled. They're not supposed to leave Level E. If they're here, Boisa. He stopped himself, words choked. Miles snapped another flash, desperate to hold them at bay with bursts of light. Each time, the figures seemed closer. The hum deepened, shaking the air. We need to move, Miles shouted. They stumbled down the corridor, footsteps pounding. The sound followed, a wave of knocks echoing behind them. The journal in Miles's pack felt like a weight dragging him down, each page burning hotter against his spine. They burst into the intersection. The painted scrawl, 94 days, loomed before them. Yates's face was pale, sweat shining on his brow. That's how long they kept us down here. 94 days before the disappearances. 94 days until they finished whatever they were doing. The knocks grew louder, closer. Dust rained from the ceiling with each strike. Miles turned down the right corridor, desperate for escape. It opened into a stairwell climbing steeply upward. He shoved Yates ahead of him, the two of them scrambling up the steps as the sound surged below. At the top, another steel door blocked their path. Miles slammed the crowbar into the lock, once, twice, until it snapped. The door flew open and they stumbled into a storage room lined with crates. Yates slammed the door shut, bolting it with shaking hands. The noise on the other side rose into a frenzy, fists pounding metal. The door shuddered in its frame. Miles doubled over, gasping. What are they? He demanded. Yates's answer was barely audible. Children, reshaped into something else. They called it the Project. They said they were building a generation immune to fear, immune to pain, but what they built doesn't belong in this world. The pounding at the door stopped abruptly. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Miles and Yates exchanged a glance, neither daring to move. Then from somewhere deeper in the tunnels, a single metallic clang echoed. Different from the knocks. He recognized it instantly. A door opening. Yates's voice broke. We weren't the only ones who came down here tonight. Miles's blood ran cold. Federal agents, the SUV. They hadn't come for questions. They had come to contain whatever was still below. And now the two of them were trapped between monsters the government had created, and the men who wanted them erased. Boots echoed in the tunnels. Sharp, disciplined, nothing like the staggering knocks that had chased them moments before. Miles pressed his back against a stack of crates, heart hammering, while Yates killed the lantern's flame with a trembling hand. Voices carried through the corridor, calm, clipped, professional. Sector B is clear. Proceed to C. No survivors expected. The words chilled Miles. Survivors. The agents weren't searching for ghosts or lost children. They were hunting something still alive. Yates's whisper brushed his ear. They've been coming down here for years. Cleaning, containing, covering. They don't destroy the place. They maintain it. Miles's throat tightened. Why maintain it? Yates didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the bolted door, the one that shook minutes ago with pounding fists, as if whatever lurked behind it might answer for him. The corridor outside lit with the glow of tactical flashlights. Shadows stretched across the walls of the storage room. Miles ducked low, crouching behind the crates. Yates followed, breathing ragged. Through the crack beneath the door, he saw them pass. 4 men in body armor, rifles slung at the ready, helmets fitted with night vision goggles. Their steps were steady, precise, not curious, not afraid. They knew exactly where they were going. One agent paused, hand pressed to his earpiece. Audible knocks in Section E. Same as last sweep, moving to intercept. Another replied, voice sharp. Keep it quiet. Command doesn't want a repeat of last time. The team moved on, their voices fading into the tunnels. Silence returned, but it wasn't the silence of safety. It was the heavy, watching silence Miles had come to dread. Yates leaned close, his whisper urgent. You see, they never shut it down. They never meant to. The experiments didn't end in 78. They just changed hands. Miles's mind reeled. His mother, the children, the journal full of names. All of it was only the beginning. The government hadn't buried Briarwood to hide its failure. They had buried it to protect its success. A sudden crash tore through the tunnels, followed by shouts. Contact! Movement in Section E! Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. The staccato bursts echoed down the corridor, mingling with the hollow, relentless rhythm of 3 knocks. Miles's blood turned cold. The agents weren't hunting anymore. They were fighting. Yates gripped his arm. This is our chance. While they're distracted, we move deeper. The answers you're chasing, your mother's fate, the reason Briarwood still stands, they're not in the pen, they're in the records room. Level D. Miles hesitated. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape before the agents or the things behind the doors closed in. But Yates's eyes burned with certainty. They built this place to test, the old man whispered, but they needed somewhere to keep the results. Files, reports, proof they can't burn. If you want the truth, we have to find it. Another explosion thundered below, shaking dust from the ceiling. The air carried the acrid sting of smoke. Miles clenched the crowbar, his jaw set. Then we move. Show me the way. They slipped out into the corridor, keeping low. The tunnels flashed sporadically with bursts of gunfire echoing from the lower levels. Shadows flickered across the walls as figures darted through the dark. Miles forced himself not to look too long at their shapes, not to question whether they were human or not. At the next intersection, Yates led him down a narrow passage. The walls closed in, lined with rusted pipes and wires that hummed faintly, as if some current still ran through them. The hum vibrated against Miles's bones, threading into his teeth. Finally, they reached another steel door, its surface stamped with faded letters. Archives. Level D. Yates's hands shook as he pulled a ring of old keys from his pocket. I stole these when I escaped. Thought I'd never use them again. The lock clicked. The door groaned open. Inside was a vast chamber lined with filing cabinets, shelves sagging under boxes, reels of tape stacked like bricks. Dust coated everything, but the air carried the sterile tang of paper and ink. It smelled less like abandonment, more like a library that had been deliberately hidden. Miles's chest tightened. Proof. Pages that couldn't be denied, stories that couldn't be silenced. He stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across rows of cabinets. Each drawer bore labels, subject logs, audio records, experiment notes. Behind him, Yates's voice shook. This is it. This is where they kept the truth. Miles pulled open the nearest drawer. Inside lay folders stamped with numbers, not names. He flipped one open. Pages spilled out. Charts, graphs, handwritten notes. Words leapt at him. Sensory deprivation. Knock stimulus response. Subject mortality rate, 68%. His breath quickened. Each page was worse than the last. And then, tucked inside one folder, he found it. A photograph. A girl, perhaps 12 years old, staring into the camera with hollow eyes. Below her image, scrawled in ink, Subject A43, Anna Grayson. Miles's vision blurred. His hands shook around the paper. His mother hadn't just been a child at Briarwood. She had been one of their subjects. Behind him, the sound returned. 3 hollow knocks, echoing faintly from the corridor outside. They weren't alone. The photograph trembled in Miles's hand. His mother's eyes stared back at him from across decades. Hollow, vacant, as though even then she had known what was being taken from her arm. The ink beneath her face, Subject A43, burned into his mind. She hadn't just lived at a Briarwood. She had been cataloged, processed, experimented on. Yates's breath rasped over his shoulder. Anna fought them harder than anyone. She tried to protect the younger ones. They punished her for it. Miles turned sharply. How do you know that? Yates's face was pale, sweat gleaming at his temples. Because I was there. I saw her dragged into the chambers. I thought she didn't survive. If she did, if she got out, it was because she did the impossible. The knock came again. 3 hollow strikes against the corridor wall outside the archive door. Steady, deliberate, not rushed, not frantic, patient. Miles shoved the photograph into his pack, along with the file, and turned back to the shelves. If we're going to risk dying here, we need proof no one can erase, enough to bury them if they come for us. They worked in frantic silence, yanking open drawers, snapping photos with Miles's camera, shoving papers into the pack. Each folder was worse than the last. Experiment log 23. Children placed in sensory chambers, exposed to rhythmic knocking until their speech patterns broke into repetition. Experiment log 41. Serum injections noted as cognitive accelerants. Side effects: seizures, deformities, dissociation. Experiment log 58. Mortality rate over 70%, yet project deemed acceptable losses. Miles's stomach churned as he flipped page after page. This wasn't research. It was butchery disguised in scientific jargon. Then his beam caught on a row of tapes stacked in a cabinet, labeled with dates. He pulled one out. October 13th, 1978, the night before the disappearance. He set it in the recorder on the desk, heart hammering as the reel began to spin. Static hissed, then a voice emerged, calm, clinical. Test sequence 9, subject A43 female, age 12. Exposure to auditory stimulus continues. Notable resistance observed. Subject repeats phrase, "You can't take me." Intensify frequency. Miles's blood turned cold. It was her. His mother's voice, faint under the static, crying out, repeating the words. He slammed the stop button, chest heaving. Yates laid a trembling hand on his shoulder. Now you know why she burned the photos. Why she never told you. She didn't want you carrying this weight. Miles shook his head violently. It's not just weight, it's evidence, and if we get this out, they can't hide it anymore. The door rattled. Both men froze. Flashlights swept through the crack beneath it, shadows flickering across the room. Voices followed, sharp, controlled. Command, we've located the archives. Possible breach. Preparing to clear. Yates's whisper was sharp. It's them. Agents. They'll take everything. Miles scanned the room desperately. Another exit? His light caught a service hatch at the far wall, half buried behind boxes. He shoved crates aside, metal screeching against concrete. The hatch was rusted, but he jammed the crowbar under it and pried. It groaned, then gave way, revealing a narrow shaft sloping deeper into the earth. The door behind them boomed under a heavy kick. The lock bent. Yates's voice shook. They'll follow us. They always do. Miles slung the pack over his shoulder, clutching the camera. Then we go deeper. The hatch yawned before them, swallowing the beam of his flashlight. Behind, the door cracked under another kick. Voices barked orders. Miles dropped into the shaft, Yates following close. The air was colder here, wet and metallic. They slid down until the shaft opened into another corridor, this one lower, narrower, its walls slick with condensation. Above them, the archive door finally gave way. Heavy boots thundered into the room they had just left. Miles and Yates pressed themselves against the wall, holding their breath. The voices echoed faintly through the hatch. Files compromised, subjects likely fled deeper, seal the upper levels, no one leaves. Yates's face was pale in the flashlight glow. They're not here to rescue anyone. They're here to trap us. The tunnel ahead stretched into black. Somewhere in that dark, a low, steady hum began to rise, vibrating through the floor. 3 knocks answered it. Miles tightened his grip on the crowbar. His mother's photograph burned in his pack, the recorder heavy in his hand. Whatever lay ahead, the truth wasn't in the files anymore. It was waiting for them, alive, just beyond the dark. The tunnel closed around them like a throat. Miles's flashlight beam barely reached 10 feet ahead before the dark swallowed it whole. Every drop of water that fell from the ceiling hit the floor like a gunshot. Behind them, faint echoes of boots on metal ladders reminded him they were not alone. Agents were already sealing the levels above. Yates limped beside him, his breathing shallow. The years of hiding had etched him into something brittle, but his eyes burned with urgency. This way leads deeper. If the diagrams are true, it connects to Level E. Miles's stomach tightened at the words. Level E. The words Evelyn had whispered with terror. The words scrawled at the bottom of the maps. Do not enter. Are you sure? He asked. No, Yates admitted. But if the files are right, it's the only way forward. They pressed on. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder, metallic. Rusted pipes lined the walls, some still dripping with condensation. The hum Miles had felt earlier began to build again, low at first, then steadily stronger, vibrating through his teeth. It wasn't machinery, it was something alive. At the bottom of the slope, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. The walls curved into a dome, streaked with rust and mildew. At its center stood a massive steel door, half buried in concrete, its surface dented from the inside. Stenciled across it in faded red paint, Level E, restricted. Miles's throat went dry. This is it. Yates's hands shook as he touched the cold steel. I swore I'd never see this door again. Before Miles could answer, the hum swelled into a deafening vibration. The floor quaked beneath them. From beyond the door, a chorus of voices rose. Thin, broken, layered in unison. 3 knocks, then words drawn out like static. Closer, closer, closer. The sound drilled into Miles's skull, making him stagger. He pressed his palms to his ears, but the voices were inside, bypassing flesh and bone. Yates clutched his head, teeth gritted. The crowbar slipped from Miles's hand. It clanged against the floor, echoing in the chamber. For a moment, the voices stopped, replaced by silence so sudden it was worse than the noise. Then softly, a single knock tapped from the other side of the steel. Yates's face drained of color. They know you're here. Before they could react, movement flickered in the shadows of the chamber. Miles swung the flashlight and froze. At the far wall, a figure crouched, half hidden in debris. Its body was human, but its proportions were wrong. Shoulders too broad, arms too long. It moved with a jerking twitch, like a puppet tugged on strings. Yates hissed, "Not one of them. Not anymore." The figure straightened, eyes glowing in the beam. It staggered forward, lips peeling back to reveal teeth filed to points. Then, in a voice that wasn't its own, it spoke. "Subject E12. Unstable. Terminate." The words weren't for them. They were a recording, broken fragments of a command repeating through the creature's mouth. Miles backed away, heart hammering. "What is it?" "One of the failed," Yates whispered. "They didn't all stay children. Some grew in the dark." The thing lunged. Miles swung the flashlight, the beam blinding it for a heartbeat. Yates grabbed the crowbar and swung with desperate force, the metal crunching against bone. The creature shrieked, voice layered with the static, before collapsing into the shadows. The steel door thundered with renewed pounding. 3 knocks, over and over, shaking the bolts loose. Yates gasped, leaning on the crowbar. They're waking up. The noise, the fighting, it stirs them. Miles scanned the chamber desperately. On the far side, half buried behind fallen concrete, he spotted another service tunnel. Narrow but open. "This way," he shouted, dragging Yates toward it. As they scrambled inside, the steel door boomed again, louder this time. Cracks split the frame. A rush of air seeped through, cold and fetid, carrying whispers that weren't words. Miles shoved Yates into the tunnel, crawling after him as the pounding shook the ground. Behind them, the bolts snapped one by one, and as the tunnel swallowed them, Miles heard it. Voices, hundreds together, spilling through the cracks. "Welcome back." The tunnel pressed in around them, narrow enough that Miles's shoulders scraped damp stone on either side. Behind, the chamber thundered with chaos. The steel door to level E groaned under pressure, bolts snapping like brittle twigs. The sound of voices, hundreds layered, pleading and mocking, poured through the cracks. "Keep moving," Miles hissed, shoving Yates ahead of him. The old man's breath came ragged, each step slower than the last. His years of hiding had left him brittle, and the crawl through stone scraped blood from his palms. Still he pushed forward, the crowbar clutched like a lifeline. The tunnel twisted sharply and dropped into a narrow stairwell carved straight from bedrock. Rusted handrails clung to the walls, long corroded. The steps descended into blackness so absolute Miles felt his flashlight beam swallowed whole. Above them the roar intensified. Metal screamed as the last bolt snapped. The pounding stopped. For a breathless moment, silence reigned. Then came the rush. Air sucked outward, as though the orphanage itself exhaled after 45 years. The tunnel walls quivered under the force. Dust rained from the ceiling. "They're out," Yates whispered, his voice breaking. "God help us. They're out." Miles grabbed his arm, dragging him down the steps. "Then we stay ahead of them." The stairs spat them into another corridor, this one different from the rest. The concrete walls were smoother, reinforced. Symbols had been etched into the surface, circles within circles, jagged lines crossing through them. Miles ran his fingers over one. It was deep, deliberate, almost ritualistic. "What do they mean?" he asked. Yates shook his head. "Not ours, the children carved them. The ones who changed. They said the marks kept the voices away. For some of them, it worked. For others?" He trailed off, the words unfinished. Miles's beam caught something ahead. A doorway half ajar, its frame bent from within. They slipped inside and found themselves in a laboratory frozen in time. Desks were strewn with glass vials. Cracked monitors lined the walls, and faded charts curled on clipboards. The air reeked of mildew and rusted metal. On one table lay a reel-to-reel recorder. Miles's hands shook as he pressed play. Static hissed, then a man's voice emerged, calm and clinical. "Level E trials proceeding as expected. Subject retention high. Vocal stimuli producing consistent 3-knock responses. Cognitive resistance minimal, with exception of subject A43. Recommend transfer to deeper chambers." Miles's breath caught. His mother again, even here her name reduced to a number. He snapped a photo of the machine, then yanked the reel free and stuffed it into his pack. Before he could turn, Yates grabbed his arm. His eyes were wide, fixed on the far corner of the lab. In the shadows, a figure sat slumped in a chair, restrained by rusted cuffs at wrists and ankles. Its head lolled forward, hair falling in lank strands. At first, Miles thought it was a corpse, another remnant of failed experiments. Then it moved. The head lifted slowly, joints creaking, eyes glowed faintly in the beam, pale and milky, lips parted, and in a voice cracked with age yet eerily childlike, it whispered, 3 days. Left. Miles staggered back. What? What does that mean? The thing strained against its cuffs, metal groaning. Its voice rose, layered now, as though dozens spoke through one mouth. 3 days, until release, until the ridge falls. The words echoed through the lab, vibrating in Miles's skull. He shoved the recorder into his pack, pulling Yates toward the door. But the restrained figure laughed, high and thin, a sound more child than adult. You can run, Grayson, but you carry her blood, and her blood is ours. Miles froze, ice flooding his veins. It knows me. Yates yanked him forward onward. Then we move, now. They stumbled back into the corridor just as the stairwell behind them thundered with approaching footsteps. Not boots this time, but bare feet slapping concrete in dozens, maybe hundreds. The voices followed, rising into a cacophony of laughter and knocks. Miles tightened his grip on the crowbar. Ahead, the corridor split, one path descending deeper, the other slanting upward toward faint currents of air. Which way? Miles demanded. Yates's face twisted. Up means the agents. Down means level E. Either way, we don't walk out the same men. The choice hung heavy in the stale air. Behind them, the first of the voices broke into a scream that shook the walls. The scream from behind ripped through the tunnels like a blade, shrill and layered, as if 100 voices had fused into one. Miles felt the sound in his ribs, a vibration that threatened to split him in two. Yates clutched the wall, his face ashen. They're coming, Yates gasped. Once they catch your scent, they don't stop. Miles swept his flashlight between the two paths, the upward slope carrying with it faint drafts of air, and the downward stair vanishing into black. Agents or abominations, death waited on both roads. Up, Miles said finally, voice steady though his stomach turned. If the agents are ahead, at least they're human. Yates's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Then move. They bolted up the incline, boots slapping wet concrete. The knocks followed, echoing closer, louder, pounding like a drumbeat inside their skulls. Miles pushed harder, dragging Yates when he faltered, until a glow appeared ahead. Not flashlight beams, something steadier, industrial. They rounded a bend and froze. The corridor widened into a checkpoint, reinforced with steel barriers. Floodlights blazed, casting the chamber in sterile white, and standing at its center were half a dozen men in tactical gear, rifles raised. Down, one barked, laser sights painting their chests. Miles lifted his hands instinctively, heart hammering. Yates did the same, the crowbar clattering to the floor. An agent stepped forward, visor reflecting the harsh light. You've gone too far. This is a restricted facility. You'll come with us. Miles's voice cracked. You don't understand. There are things behind us, things you created. They're loosed. The agent didn't flinch. Containment is our concern, not yours. Another voice cut through, smoother, colder. From the shadows behind the floodlights, a man in a dark suit stepped forward. No armor, no helmet. His hair was gray, his expression unreadable. Mr. Grayson, he said evenly, we've been expecting you. Miles's blood ran cold. Who are you? Oh, the man smiled faintly. Director Holloway. I oversaw Briarwood's closure in 1978, and I warned your mother to stop. The words struck like a hammer. Miles's throat tightened. You knew her. I knew all of them, Holloway said. Subjects, staff, witnesses. Some obeyed, some resisted. Resistance never ended well. His eyes flicked to Yates. Isn't that right, Charles? Yates's face twisted with rage. You should have burned this place to the ground. Holloway's smile didn't falter. On the contrary, Briarwood was one of our most successful trials. Not perfect, but promising. We've refined the methods since then. The work continues. Miles's stomach turned. You're still doing this. Of course, Holloway said calmly. The world is dangerous. Fear is a weakness. Pain is a liability. Imagine a generation immune to both. That is what Briarwood was always about. Your mother was close to surviving the process. That's why you're here now. The words made Miles stagger. What do you mean? Holloway stepped closer, his voice dropping. You were never outside of it, Mr. Grayson. You carry her blood, her resistance, her potential. You were born because of Briarwood, and now you've returned to finish what she started. The air behind them trembled. The pounding grew louder, closer, shaking the floor. Agents shifted uneasily, rifles turning toward the corridor Miles and Yates had fled. Holloway didn't move. His eyes remained on Miles. You have a choice. Come with us, willingly, and inherit what was meant for you. Or stay in these tunnels and be devoured by the failures of the past. Yates hissed through his teeth. Don't listen. He's been saying the same lies for decades. Your mother fought him, and so must you. The pounding thundered now, dust raining from the ceiling. Something massive was forcing its way up the incline. The agents tightened their grips on their rifles, fear finally breaking their composure. Holloway extended a hand toward Miles, calm in the chaos. Choose quickly. They're almost here. Miles's breath came ragged, his mind tearing in two directions. Ahead stood men who had orchestrated decades of horror. Behind surged the things born from it. There was no safe path left. Only which nightmare he would face first. The corridor shook with the force of the pounding below. Concrete dust sifted down like ash, settling on helmets and rifles. The agents tensed, weapons aimed into the dark, while Holloway stood unmoving, his outstretched hands steady as stone. Time is over, Mr. Grayson, Holloway said, his voice calm against the chaos. Step forward. Claim what your mother could not. Miles's throat burned. His mother's face stared at him from the photograph in his pack, her defiance scrawled in every line. He thought of her final words on her deathbed, broken and fevered. Don't go looking. Behind him, Yates hissed. Don't you dare. That man's promises are poison. He doesn't want to save you. He wants to finish what they started on her. The pounding surged closer now, the echoes filling every nerve in Miles's body. A scream cut through the tunnel, thin and childlike, layered with static. Agents flinched. One shouted, they're breaching the checkpoint. Floodlights flickered. Shadows writhed at the far end of the corridor as shapes pressed against the walls. Long arms stretching, mouths opening in silent howls. The sound of knuckles striking concrete rose in perfect rhythm. 3. Pause. 3. Panic flashed across the soldiers' faces. One fired, the muzzle flash igniting the tunnel in bursts. The gunfire rolled like thunder, but the figures did not retreat. They advanced. Now, Miles, Holloway barked, his eyes locked on him. Come with me before it's too late. Miles's chest heaved. Between the monsters born of Briarwood and the men who had created them, there was no safe choice. But one truth cut through the noise. His mother had resisted. She had chosen defiance, and so would he. No, Miles spat. Holloway's smile faltered, his hand lowering slowly. Then you will be nothing more than another failed experiment. The pounding became a roar as the first of the creatures broke into the checkpoint. White eyes glowed in the floodlights, limbs jerking unnaturally as they surged forward. Agents opened fire, their shouts drowned in static-filled screams. Miles seized Yates's arm. Move! They sprinted past the crossfire, ducking low as bullets cracked overhead. Holloway didn't flinch. He simply stepped back into the shadows, his face vanishing into the chaos as though he had never been there. Miles and Yates dove into a side corridor, the roar of battle chasing them. The tunnel twisted sharply, the sound of gunfire fading into the distance. But the knocks did not fade. They followed, steady, patient. At last, they stumbled into a cavernous chamber, unlike anything Miles had seen. The walls were carved stone, older than the orphanage above, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly in the beam of his light. At the center stood a circular pit, ringed by steel rails and scaffolding. Yates leaned against the wall, gasping for air. This is it. This is where they built the project's heart. Miles peered into the pit. The light barely reached the bottom, but he could see movement. something shifting in the black. The air rising from it reeked of rust and decay. "What's down there?" he asked. Yates's face was pale. "Not what? Who?" They called it the core, the first subject, the one who survived everything they did, the one they built the others from. The words chilled Miles. The knocking grew louder, echoing up from the pit now, each strike shaking the rails. 3 days, Miles whispered, remembering the restrained figure in the lab. 3 days until release. That's what it meant. Yates nodded grimly. The core isn't just waiting, it's counting down. Before Miles could respond, the tunnel behind them erupted with noise. Floodlights blazed, and a squad of agents stormed into the chamber. Rifles raised. At their center strode Holloway, calm, untouched by the chaos behind. "You see now why you must choose," Holloway said, his voice echoing through the cavern. "The core is waking. In 3 days, everything above will fall. But you, your blood, can control it. You can lead it. Or you can die with the rest of them." The knocking rose into a frenzy, shaking dust from the ceiling. From the pit, pale hands began to claw at the walls, pulling upward. Miles stood frozen between two horrors, the man who wanted to use him and the thing rising from the depths that bore his mother's legacy. Yates whispered fiercely, "Whatever you do, don't believe him. Your mother died to keep this buried. Don't undo her sacrifice." Holloway extended his hand once more. The core's hand scraped higher. The chamber trembled. The choice would not wait. The chamber shuddered as pale hands clawed higher along the pit walls. Each movement sent tremors through the floor, scattering dust and pebbles. The air thickened, damp and electric, carrying the metallic stench of blood and rust. Miles's flashlight beam trembled over the rising form, catching glimpses of gray flesh stretched thin across bones too long, too sharp. Yates clutched Miles's arm, his voice hoarse. "Don't look at it. Don't listen." But the core demanded attention. Its head rose slowly from the pit, shrouded in strands of matted hair. Its eyes glowed faintly, not white like the others, but silver, reflecting every flicker of light in the chamber. Its lips parted, and when it spoke, the sound was a chorus of children layered with static. "Anna's son." Miles's stomach lurched. The voice burrowed straight into his chest, bypassing his ears entirely. His mother's name, spoken by this thing. Holloway stepped forward, unshaken by the tremors. His tone was almost reverent. "Do you see now, Grayson? The core remembers her. It remembers everything, and it recognizes you." The core's gaze locked on Miles. Its voice rippled through the chamber, vibrating the steel rails. "Her blood, her defiance, passed to you. Come closer." The words nearly pulled him forward, his feet shifting without thought. Yates yanked him back violently. "Don't. That's how it draws you in. Once you answer, it owns you." Holloway raised his arms as if in benediction. "Own him? No, it will follow him. He can lead it. With Grayson, we can command what we created instead of fearing it. He is the key." Agents shifted uneasily behind Holloway. Some aimed their rifles at the pit, knuckles white. Others glanced nervously at their commander, sweat gleaming under the floodlights. The core dragged more of itself into view. Its torso rose, scarred with surgical marks, wires still embedded in flesh. Symbols, circles, and jagged lines had been carved into its skin like tattoos, glowing faintly with the same silver light as its eyes. Miles's breath caught. The symbols matched the ones on the tunnel walls. Yates's whisper cut the air. They weren't to ward it off. They were its mark, its signature. The core's mouth twisted into something like a smile. 3 days, then the ridge falls, unless you open the way. The ground rumbled again, deeper this time, as if the mountain itself were answering. Holloway's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Grayson, step forward now, and you will not just survive. You will shape the future. Deny me, and you will die here with the failures." Miles's heart hammered, his mother's photograph pressed against his chest in the pack, the weight of her gaze reminding him she had resisted, she had fought. And yet, staring into the core's silver eyes, he felt something pulling at him, something in his blood answering a call older than his memory. Yates grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to meet his eyes. "Your mother chose to die rather than give them what they wanted. Don't undo her fight. Don't let them use you. The core leaned higher out of the pit, its full height revealed, twisted limbs, ribs like a cham, a body both childlike and monstrous. Its voice boomed now, shaking the walls. Blood calls to blood. You are mine. The agents broke. Some fired into the pit, bullets sparking against the creature's flesh with little effect. Others retreated toward the tunnels, their discipline dissolving into raw fear. Holloway remained unmoved, his hand still outstretched. Decide, Grayson, with me or against the future. The chamber quaked. Cracks spiderwebbed through the ceiling, dust pouring like sand. From the pit, more pale hands clawed upward. Smaller, weaker, but countless. The children that had been left behind. The core was not rising alone. Miles's breath came ragged. He stood trapped between three horrors. The core that claimed his blood, the agents who wanted to use him, and the swarm of remnants clawing their way into the light. And for the first time, he realized the truth. There might be no escape. Only which part of Briarwood consumed him first. Bullets sparked against the core's flesh, ricocheting like pebbles off stone. The creature's silver eyes flared brighter, its voice rolling through the chamber like thunder. You cannot kill me. You made me. Agents shouted over the gunfire, panic cracking their discipline. One screamed, fall back! But Holloway barked a single command, hold the line! His voice carried such authority that half the squad froze where they stood, torn between training and terror. Miles felt the pull in his chest intensify. Every word from the core reverberated inside him as though his veins carried an echo of its voice. His legs trembled, not from fear alone, but from something deeper, a resonance that wanted to drag him forward. Yates clung to his arm, shaking him. Fight it! It's in your blood, but that doesn't mean it owns you. Remember your mother. She resisted. So can you. The core turned its gaze fully on Miles. The chaos of rifles, screams, and collapsing stones seemed to fade, leaving only that voice inside his skull. She resisted, she failed. You are stronger. You are mine. No, Miles shouted, though the word felt small against the roar. He yanked the photograph of his mother from his pack, holding it up like a shield. She was never yours, and neither am I. The core recoiled slightly, its silver eyes narrowing. The remnants clawing from the pit shrieked in unison, the sound so piercing it shattered a floodlight overhead. Sparks rained across the chamber, plunging half the room into shadow. Holloway's face twisted with sudden urgency. For the first time, his composure cracked. Grayson, listen to me. That thing isn't your mother's legacy. It's her curse. Without you, we can't control it. With you, we can chain it. Do you want her suffering to mean nothing? The words hit hard, calculated to wound. Miles staggered, doubt gnawing at him. Could his blood be the key to stopping the core, not serving it? But Yates's voice cut through, raw and furious. Don't you see? He's using you the same way he used her. There is no chain strong enough for that thing. If you give them what they want, the world becomes Briarwood. The core's hands clutched the rim of the pit now, its full body pulling into the chamber. It towered above them all, limbs grotesque, chest rising and falling with unnatural rhythm. The remnants spilled after it, scores of pale figures scrambling up the walls, eyes glowing, mouths open in static-filled howls. The agents broke formation. Gunfire became wild, desperate. One soldier was dragged screaming into the pit, his voice cut off by a wet crunch. Another stumbled back, tripping over a cable, only to vanish under clawed hands. Holloway did not move. His eyes stayed locked on Miles, his hand still outstretched. Choose, he roared. Miles's chest burned. His mother's photograph trembled in his grip, the edges fraying under his fingers. Around him, the chamber was collapsing into chaos. Bullets, screams, pounding fists, the core's silver gaze burning through the smoke. Something inside him broke free then. Not surrender, not obedience, but rage. Rage at Holloway, at Briarwood, at the years stolen from his mother, at the blood now demanding his loyalty. No, Miles said, his voice low but steady. I won't be your weapon, and I won't be its heir. He shoved the photograph back into his pack, swung the crowbar high, and brought it down on the steel railing that ringed the pit. The weakened metal screeched, cracked, and gave way. Sections of the scaffolding collapsed inward, crashing onto the remnants climbing up. Screams echoed as bodies fell back into the dark. The core roared, its voice shaking the mountain. Debris rained from the ceiling. "Run!" Yates shouted, dragging Miles toward a service tunnel that had opened in the collapse. The agents were scattering, some fleeing with them, others still firing blindly at the core. Holloway's voice carried even through the chaos, calm and unbroken. "You can't run from what's inside you, Grayson. In the end, you'll come back. They always do." Miles didn't look back. He forced himself into the narrow tunnel, the roar of the core and the screams of men chasing him into the dark. For a moment, the mountain seemed to hold its breath. Then the knocking began again, louder than ever, rolling through stone and steel in endless rhythm. 3. Pause. 3. And Miles realized with horror that the sound was no longer behind them. It was ahead. The tunnel pressed tight around them, every surface slick with condensation. Miles's flashlight beam cut through the dark, trembling in his hand. Yates limped close behind, his breath ragged, every exhale echoing against the walls. But the sound that froze Miles's blood was not Yates's wheeze or it was the knocking. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more. The sound rolled forward through the tunnel, not from behind but ahead, measured, patient, waiting. Miles stopped short, the beam catching only stone and shadow. His pulse thudded in his ears. "It's in front of us." Yates's face was pale in the glow, lips drawn thin. "They're everywhere now. The core's release woke the rest. They're not bound to one place anymore." The knocks came again, closer this time. Miles raised the crowbar instinctively, though the gesture felt hollow against what he knew was waiting. He forced himself forward, each step an act of will. The tunnel bent sharply left, opening into a smaller chamber. The air here was colder, stinging his lungs with each breath. On the far wall, words had been scrawled in a child's hand, faded but legible in the light. "Don't answer." Beneath it, the knocking repeated, this time from the wall itself. 3. Pause. 3. Dust shook loose with each strike, forming a fine mist in the beam of the flashlight. Miles swallowed hard. "It's like they're inside the stone." Yates shook his head. "Not inside. Behind. There are layers of tunnels even we never saw." The sound stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and absolute. Then slowly a voice seeped through the wall, thin and childlike. "Help us!" Miles staggered back. The voice was small, trembling, innocent, so achingly human it clawed at his resolve. "Don't listen," Yates snapped, grabbing his arm. "That's not them. That's what's left of them." But the voice came again, joined by others, overlapping, pleading, "Help us! We're cold, please, please." Miles pressed his palms to his ears, but the voices burrowed past flesh and bone. His mother's face flashed in his mind, her hollow eyes in the photograph. What if some part of her had survived here, calling to him now? The wall shuddered, cracks spider-webbed across the stone, dust raining down, fingers pushed through, a dozen pale hands clawing for freedom. "Move!" Yates shouted. They sprinted down the corridor, the sound of stone collapsing behind them. Pale forms spilled through the cracks, their shrieks piercing the air. Miles didn't dare look back. He could feel them gaining, their footsteps slapping wet against the stone. The tunnel narrowed again, leading to a rusted ladder bolted into the wall. Miles shoved Yates upward first, then scrambled after him. The ladder rattled under their weight, bolts groaning. They emerged into another chamber, this one vast and circular, with catwalks suspended over a pit of machinery. The air was hot here, humming with dormant power. Miles recognized the place from the diagrams in the folder, the generator hall. Yates collapsed against the railing, gasping. This powered everything down there. The chambers, the sound machines, the doors. If we can shut it for good, if we can destroy it, we cut off their reach. Miles scanned the catwalks. Cables thick as tree trunks coiled into turbines. Gauges still glowed faintly, needles twitching as though some hidden current still pulsed. He tightened his grip on the crowbar. Then we bring it down. Before they could move, another sound echoed through the hall. Boots on steel, floodlights flared from a catwalk across the chamber. Agents. At their center was Holloway, calm as ever, his suit immaculate despite the chaos. His voice rolled through the cavern. You're playing with forces you can't comprehend, Grayson. Shut this down and you'll doom us all. Yates barked a laugh, ragged and bitter. You doomed us 45 years ago. Holloway raised a hand, and the agents leveled their rifles. Last chance. Step away from the controls, and maybe you walk out of here alive. The knocking answered him. It rolled through the generator hall, not from walls or doors, but from beneath the machinery itself. The steel under their feet vibrated, each strike like a heartbeat rising from the earth. 3. Pause. 3. Miles's chest clenched. The Corps' voice followed, not from the pit they'd left, but everywhere at once, seeping through the walls, the floor, the air itself. Oh, blood calls to blood. You cannot silence us. The turbines roared to life, spinning with sudden force. The entire hall shook, floodlights flickering. The Corps was waking the machines, feeding on their power. Yates's voice broke. If we don't stop this now, it won't be 3 days. It'll be tonight. Miles stared at the controls, then at the rifles aimed at his chest. The choice was his: surrender to Holloway or destroy the very heart of Briarwood and risk unleashing everything buried with it. The turbines roared louder, their blades cutting the air like screams. Gauges spun wildly, needles slamming against red zones. Sparks leapt from cracked panels, showering the catwalk in light. The whole chamber pulsed with energy, as if the mountain itself had woken from a 45-year slumber. Holloway's voice cut through the chaos, calm yet commanding. You can't destroy it, Grayson. The Corps isn't just inside the pit anymore. It's inside the system. Kill the power, and you don't stop it. You free it. His agents inched closer, rifles raised. Their faces, though hidden under visors, twitched with unease. The knocking was everywhere now, rolling beneath their boots, rattling the railings, beating in time with their hearts. Yates gripped Miles's shoulder, his eyes burning. Don't listen to him. He's been feeding that machine for decades. The only way to end it is to cut the veins. Another knock shook the catwalk, so violent the steel quivered. Miles staggered, gripping the railing, his flashlight beam flashing across the depths of the hall. Through the grating below, pale shapes writhed between the turbines. Not corpses, remnants, crawling, feeding on the current. Their eyes glowed white as arcs of electricity danced across their skin. Miles's stomach turned. They're using the power. Not using, Yates rasped. Becoming. Every spark makes them stronger. The Corps' voice thundered from everywhere at once, echoing through the turbines, vibrating the rails. Blood cannot cut blood. You are part of us. Miles clenched his teeth, lifting the crowbar. Then you've never met me. He swung the crowbar into the nearest control panel. The glass shattered, sparks exploding outward. The turbines screamed as gauges burst, spewing smoke. The agents opened fire instantly, muzzle flashes blinding in the haze. Bullets sparked off the railings, ricocheted off steel. Miles dropped low, dragging Yates with him as a storm of rounds ripped through the catwalk. Stop him! Holloway's voice cracked for the first time, edged with fury. Miles crawled to the main console, wires exposed and hissing. He jammed the crowbar into the heart of the circuitry. A surge ripped up his arms, burning his muscles, but he held fast. The turbines wailed, gears grinding as the system tore itself apart. One of the agents lunged forward, seizing Miles by the collar. His visor cracked in the light, revealing terrified eyes. Before he could fire, Yates swung the crowbar with desperate strength, knocking him over the railing. His scream echoed into the turbines below, cut short by a wet, sparking crunch. The turbines shuddered once, twice, then exploded. A shockwave tore through the chamber, flinging men and debris alike. Floodlights burst, plunging the hall into strobing darkness, lit only by arcs of electricity. The remnants below shrieked in unison, their forms convulsing as the current died. Miles hit the catwalk hard, the breath ripped from his chest. His ears rang, smoke clawing at his lungs. Beside him, Yates coughed, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Through the haze, Holloway rose slowly, his suit scorched but his composure unbroken. His eyes blazed with a cold fury. You've doomed us all, Grayson. Without the containment, The core will not wait 3 days. It will rise tonight. As if summoned by his words, the knocking returned, louder, faster, no longer patient, hungry. The chamber walls split with cracks, concrete falling in slabs. From the depths of the pit, a roar erupted, deeper than thunder, shaking the mountain to its foundations. Miles staggered to his feet, dragging Yates upright. The pack on his shoulders felt heavier than ever. The journal, the tapes, the photograph of his mother, all the proof he'd risked his life for. But now the truth wasn't in papers or recordings. It was clawing its way into the world. Holloway's voice carried over the chaos, a twisted benediction. This is what she resisted, Grayson, and this is what you've unleashed. The floor buckled. Catwalks tore free, plunging into the darkness below. Agents screamed as they fell, their rifles clattering uselessly into the pit. The turbines collapsed inward, a storm of sparks and smoke. Through it all, the core's silver eyes opened in the depths, twin beacons rising through the dark. Its voice split the air, a single command. Come closer. Miles grabbed Yates's arm and ran for the service hatch on the far wall, the only exit not yet swallowed by a collapse. Behind them, the mountain roared, the core climbing, the remnants shrieking in a chorus of hunger. The world above had no idea what was waking beneath their feet. The service hatch screeched as Miles forced it open, shoving Yates through first. The old man scrambled into the narrow crawl space, coughing against the smoke that bled into every corner. Miles followed, the crowbar clanging against steel as he dragged himself inside. Behind them, the generator hall collapsed in a cacophony of screams, twisting metal, and thunder. The core's roar rose above it all, so vast and resonant, it didn't just shake the walls, it shook their bones. The tunnel sloped upward, each meter a battle against exhaustion. Dust choked the air, coating Miles's tongue in grit. The journal in his pack dug into his back like an anchor, but he refused to let it go. Proof was the only weapon left. Yates stumbled, nearly falling, but Miles caught him under the arm and hauled him forward. Don't stop, Miles rasped. If we stop, it's over. The knocking followed, impossibly close, rolling through the stone like a second heartbeat. Sometimes it came from behind, sometimes ahead, sometimes directly beneath their feet. Always three, always patient. They burst into a wider passage, the stale air giving way to a draft that smelled of pine and damp earth. Miles's chest surged with hope. We're close to the surface. But before they could push on, flashlights cut through the dust from the far end of the tunnel. A squad of agents, half their visors shattered, uniforms torn, stumbled into view. Panic etched every movement. They're loose, one shouted, voice cracked. Fall back to the ridge. Miles dragged Yates into the shadows of a side alcove as the men rushed past. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with the kind of fear no training could erase. One carried a wounded comrade slung over his shoulder, blood dripping a trail across the stone. Behind them, something moved. The remnants poured into the tunnel, pale shapes filling the corridor, limbs jerking, eyes glowing. Their mouths opened in perfect unison, static pouring out like a broken radio signal. The sound drowned the screams of the retreating men. Yates gripped Miles's sleeve, whispering through clenched teeth. If they reach the surface, Ashford Hollow won't stand a chance. Miles's heart thundered. He had wanted proof, wanted the truth revealed, but not like this, not with the town devoured in a storm of pale mouths and hollow eyes. The agents fired blindly, muzzle flashes strobing the corridor. For every creature that fell, 3 more surged forward. Claws raked, jaws snapped, bones cracked. The air reeked of blood and ozone. Miles pulled Yates into a side tunnel away from the slaughter. They ran hunched, footsteps muffled against damp stone. Behind them, the roar of the core rose again, closer now, shaking dust from the ceiling. The tunnel spat them out into a cavern that opened like a mouth into the night. Stars glittered overhead, sharp and cold. For a moment, Miles sucked in the fresh air with something like relief. Then he froze. The ridge below was alive with movement. Trucks, floodlights, armed men, federal forces swarming the mountainside. But even from here, he could see them faltering. Remnants were spilling from hidden cracks and tunnels, pale forms pouring into the night. Gunfire rattled the forest. Screams echoed off the cliffs. Yates staggered to the edge of the cavern mouth, his voice breaking. It's already begun. Miles's gut twisted. Ashford Hollow glimmered faintly in the valley below, its streets quiet, unaware. 3 days had collapsed into hours. The core was no longer waiting. Behind them, a new sound rose. Boots on stone. Miles spun, raising the crowbar. Out of the smoke stepped Holloway, his suit torn, his face streaked with ash. Yet his eyes still burned with conviction. 2 agents flanked him, bloodied but alive. You see now, Holloway said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the roar of the battle below. The world can't survive this without control. Without you. Miles's knuckles whitened on the crowbar. You mean without using me? Without guiding you, Holloway corrected. You are the only one it listens to. You felt it, didn't you? Its voice inside your chest. You can resist, yes, but resistance is wasted. With you, we can turn chaos into order. Without you, Ashford Hollow burns tonight. Yates snarled, voice raw. He wants to chain you to the same monster that destroyed your mother. Don't listen. The ground quaked violently. From the cavern behind them, a low silver light began to glow, spilling outward like a rising dawn. The core was coming. Miles stood between 2 truths. The horror below devouring soldiers and the greater horror behind him clawing toward the surface. Holloway's hand extended again. Steady. Certain. Yates whispered fiercely, Your mother fought to bury this. You fight to end it. The core's voice rolled through the night, so loud the stars seemed to tremble. Come closer. And Miles realized that no matter which choice he made, the ridge and the world would never be the same. The silver light from the cavern behind them swelled, spilling over the stone walls like liquid moonlight. The core was climbing, its immense form pressing against the tunnel mouth, dragging the remnants with it. The air vibrated with its voice, a layered chorus that made Miles's teeth ache. Blood calls to blood. Below, Ashford Hollow was no longer quiet. From their vantage on the ridge, Miles could see flashes erupting in the valley, gunfire, floodlights, panicked vehicles weaving through the streets. The remnants had already reached the town. Holloway's voice cut through the case, calm and commanding. Do you see now, Grayson? It has begun. Only you can stand between annihilation and control. You are its tether. With you it obeys. Without you it devours. Miles's hands shook around the crowbar. The journal pressed against his back like a second heartbeat. He thought of the photograph inside. His mother's eyes staring out from the past, hollow yet defiant. She had resisted. She had fought until her last breath. And still the core spoke with her voice layered among the rest. Anna's son, closer. His knees buckled. For an instant he wanted to give in, to stop running, to step forward and silence the pull by surrendering to it. But Yates grabbed him, shaking him hard enough to rattle his teeth. Don't listen. That thing isn't your mother, it's what killed her. If you give in now, you undo everything she died for. The core roared again, the cavern mouth collapsing in a spray of dust and stone as its shoulders forced through. Pale remnants spilled around its limbs like water, their glowing eyes fixed on Miles. Agents opened fire. Bullets sparked harmlessly across gray flesh. The remnants screamed, their voices splitting the air like static, and tore into the soldiers. Holloway didn't move. His suit was torn, his face streaked with ash, but his eyes never wavered. Grayson, he said, his voice sharp as a blade, choose. Stand with us and master it, or fight and watch your world burn. The core rose fully into the night. It stood taller than the trees, its twisted frame backlit by stars. Its silver eyes cut through the dark, and when it looked at Miles, he felt every cell in his body vibrate. Yates drew himself up beside him, gripping the crowbar with shaking hands. If we die tonight, he rasped, we die on our feet, not on our knees. Miles's throat burned. He thought of the cages, the journals, the tapes, of Evelyn's warning, of his mother's silence, of the children who had scratched tallies into the walls until the count stopped at 94. He thought of every knock that had chased him through the dark, and for the first time, he understood what it meant. The knocks weren't invitations. They weren't commands. They were warnings. The core wanted him closer because it feared what he could do if he stayed away. Miles lifted the crowbar, his voice raw. I'm not your blood. I'm your end. The Corps screamed, a sound so vast it split the sky. Trees shuddered, rocks split, the ridge quaked. Remnants surged forward in a tide of gray limbs and glowing eyes. Agents scattered, firing blindly. Holloway shouted above it all, his composure finally cracking. "Stop him! Don't let him reach the town." Miles dragged Yates toward the narrow path that wound down the ridge. The town below was already under siege, but if the Corps reached it unchallenged, there would be nothing left to save. Every step shook with the monster's approach. Its silver light flooded the forest, its voice rolling like thunder. "You cannot silence us. You are us." Miles didn't look back. He held the crowbar tight, the weight of proof heavy in his pack, and forced himself down the mountain. Because he knew the final battle wouldn't be fought in tunnels or ruins. It would be fought in the heart of Ashford Hollow. Ashford Hollow was burning. By the time Miles and Yates stumbled down the ridge path, the quiet little town he had known was chaos. Sirens wailed across the valley. Floodlights swung wildly from trucks that had been overturned in the streets. Civilians ran through the night, some barefoot, some clutching children, all screaming. The remnants had reached the town ahead of them. They poured from alleys and storm drains, pale shapes dragging themselves across pavement, limbs jerking in spasms, mouths open in static-filled cries. They smashed through windows, tore doors from their hinges, and moved house to house with animal hunger. Miles froze on the edge of Main Street, chest heaving, flashlight beam trembling over the horror. He had wanted truth. He had wanted to show the world what Briarwood had done. But now the truth was spilling across asphalt in blood. Beside him, Yates leaned on the crowbar, face gray with exhaustion. "It's happening all over again, just like '78. Only this time there's no silence to bury it." Miles's jaw clenched. He forced himself forward, weaving through the chaos. He dragged Yates into the shadows of a storefront as a cluster of remnants scuttled past, their eyes glowing, their heads twitching to the rhythm of the three knocks that pounded endlessly in the distance. From the ridge above, the Corps descended. Its massive frame tore through trees like matchsticks. Its silver light washed across rooftops, throwing the town into sharp relief. Every window pane shook with its voice. "Come closer!" People collapsed in the streets, clutching their ears. Some screamed, some went silent, their bodies twitching as though strings had been pulled tight. The Corps' call wasn't just sound, it was command, and too many were already answering. Miles gritted his teeth, dragging Yates toward the courthouse steps at the center of town. The old stone building still stood firm, floodlights blazing across its facade. Inside, townspeople huddled behind barricaded doors, the last semblance of order in the chaos. A voice barked from the doorway as they approached. "Get inside, now!" Two deputies yanked them through, slamming the heavy door shut behind. Inside, the foyer was crowded with terrified families. Deputies reloading rifles with shaking hands, medics tending to the wounded on the floor. The smell of blood and gun oil hung heavy. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered woman with tired eyes, strode forward, shotgun in hand. "You, Grayson?" she demanded. Miles nodded, breathless. "Then you've got some explaining to do," she snapped. "Every nightmare in this valley just crawled out of your orphanage, and now my town is dying." Miles's voice cracked. "It's not mine. It was never supposed to be anyone's. They built it. They kept it buried. Now it's loose." The sheriff's glare softened only slightly. "Then tell me how the hell we kill it." The building shuddered. Windows rattled in their frames. The Corps' voice rolled through the walls deep enough to rattle bones. "Anna's son." Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the foyer. Mothers clutched their children tighter. All eyes fell on Miles. Yates stepped forward, his voice rough but steady. "He doesn't belong to it. He's the one who can stop it, but only if we keep him alive long enough to try." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. She studied Miles for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine. You want to fight? You're in command now. My men will follow you." Miles's stomach dropped. Command. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a leader. He was a journalist chasing ghosts. But as the Corps' shadow swept across the courthouse windows, he realized none of that mattered. If he didn't act, Ashford Hollow wouldn't live to see dawn. He pulled the journal from his pack, slamming it down on the nearest table. Pages spilled open, diagrams of tunnels, records of experiments, notes on sound and control. His flashlight beam darted across the entries. They controlled them with sound, Miles said, his voice sharpening as the pieces clicked together. Frequencies, pulses, rhythms. That's why the knocks never stopped. That's why it wants me to answer. If we can find a counter signal, we can disrupt it, break its hold. The sheriff frowned. And how the hell do we do that? Miles's fingers trembled as he traced a diagram of the generator systems, their connections to the valley's old radio towers. We don't need the machines under the orphanage. We just need power and a transmitter. Yates's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The old broadcast station on the West Ridge. They shut it down years ago, but the tower's still there. The sheriff slammed the shotgun shut. Then that's our target. We get you to that tower, we give you your signal, and we pray to God it's enough. Outside, the core roared again, shaking the courthouse to its foundations. Windows cracked, light fixtures swayed. Miles stuffed the journal back into his pack, gripping the crowbar. His mother's photograph pressed against his chest like a heartbeat. Then we move, he said, before it calls the whole town. The night was fire and screams. Miles led the way through Ashford Hollow's shattered streets, the sheriff and her deputies clearing a path with gunfire. Yates stumbled beside him, clutching the crowbar, his face pale but his eyes fierce. Above them the core loomed, its silver light flooding rooftops, remnants swarming at its feet like a living tide. Everywhere the knocking. 3 beats. Pause. 3 more. The rhythm was endless, rolling through stone and bone alike. They fought their way west, past overturned cars and broken glass, toward the silhouette of the old broadcast tower rising against the stars. It was rusted, skeletal, but still standing. Their only chance. Remnants poured from the alleys, pale hands grasping. Deputies fell, dragged screaming into the dark. The sheriff fired until her shotgun clicked and empty, then swung it like a club. "Go!" she roared at Miles. "Get to the tower!" Miles didn't hesitate. He dragged Yates up the hill, lungs burning, every step chased by static-filled screams. At the tower's base, the small broadcast shack still stood, windows broken, roof sagging. Miles shoved the door open. Dust choked the air, but the console inside still hummed faintly when he threw the breaker. Lights flickered weakly to life. "It still works," Yates rasped. Miles tore through the journal, flipping to diagrams of sound patterns, frequencies. His mother's name scrawled across the margins. Subject A43. Resistance? High. She had resisted because she had fought the signal. That was the key. He set the dials with trembling fingers, aligning frequencies, shaping the pattern that had haunted him since the tunnels. 3 beats. Pause. 3. But inverted, reversed into disruption. Not answering the knock, breaking it. The core's shadow fell across the shack. The walls shook with its voice. "Anna's son, you are ours." Miles slammed the final switch. The tower blazed to life, its skeletal frame humming with power. A low thrum rolled across the valley, rising into a piercing wave. The remnants froze mid-scream, their heads snapping upward. Their eyes flickered, white glow sputtering. Then one by one they collapsed, twitching, their static cut short. The core reeled, its silver eyes flaring in pain. Its roar shook the stars. It clawed at the earth, staggering, the signal tearing through its body like fire. Miles pressed the microphone to his lips, his voice raw, shaking but defiant. "You don't own me. You never owned her. And tonight you end." He slammed the crowbar onto the console, overloading the circuits. Electricity surged up the tower, brighter, louder, until the steel glowed white-hot. The core screamed, a sound of fury and despair, before its form fractured. Light ripping through flesh, symbols burning away. The silver glow shattered into the sky like 1,000 sparks. Then silence. When the light cleared, the ridge was still. The remnants were gone. The core was gone. Only ash remained. Miles staggered from the shack, the pack heavy on his shoulders, the photograph of his mother pressed to his chest. Yates stood beside him, leaning on the crowbar, his face streaked with tears. The sheriff limped up the hill with the few deputies who had survived, their eyes wide with shock as they stared at the empty valley below. Ashford Hollow still stood, scarred, bloodied, but alive. Miles sank to his knees, staring at the stars above. For the first time in years, the knocking was gone. And in that silence, he heard something else. Not a command, not a warning, just his mother's voice, faint in memory. "Don't go looking." He smiled bitterly, clutching the photograph. "I looked, Mom, and I finished it." The wind carried his words into the night. Ashford Hollow would rebuild. The truth would be told, and Briarwood would never rise again.